Welcome back, everyone, from 4th of July weekend. I haven't posted or, I guess, uploaded a podcast in quite some time because I've been spending time with my family out at the lake, celebrating 4th of July, Independence Day. Had a really great time fishing and swimming and boating and all that good stuff and hanging out with my family. So I hope you had a great time away also, if you got to go out or just relaxing time in. We're going to continue in Genesis. We're in chapter 28. Remember, chapter 27, we talked about how this family was extremely dysfunctional, manipulative, trying to get their own way or bring about God's will through human means. Well, today we're going to talk about what happens to Jacob, because we left off in verse 46 of chapter 27, where it says, "So Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm sick of my life because of these Hittite women. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like one of them, what good is my life?" And so Rebekah is trying to convince her husband to send Jacob away. Well, she's making up this pretense about, I'm tired of these Hittite women, which, probably isn't necessarily a pretense. They said that the wives of Esau were very like a pain in the side of these two people. So it's probably not that hard to come up with this argument that we should send Jacob off to get married elsewhere. But ultimately, the reason she does this is because, if you remember, Esau wants to kill his brother, who has now traded for and taken his birthright and also his blessing. And so Jacob is fleeing, basically, under the pretense of going to find a wife. So we're going to pick it up in verse 1 of chapter 28. Isaac summoned Jacob, blessed him, and commanded him, "Don't take a wife from the Canaanite women. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father. Marry one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you so that you become an assembly of peoples. May God give you and your offspring the blessing of Abraham, so that you may possess the land where you live as an alien, the land God gave to Abraham." So Isaac sent Jacob to Padan Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. So Isaac is giving Jacob this blessing, saying, may God give you and your offspring the blessing of Abraham, so that you can possess the land where you live as an alien, the land God gave to Abraham. He's passing on this mandate that was passed down to him onto his son Jacob. So he's finally submitting to God's will that Jacob is the one that this covenant is going to flow to. Eventually, like we talked about earlier, we're going to get to King David. We're going to get to Jesus himself, comes through this line, and Jacob is in that line. Now, he's sending him away to go marry a daughter of basically his uncle. So this is a cousin. Interesting. But anyways, this is the uncle who, if you remember, was the one that negotiated with that servant whenever Isaac was looking for a wife. So same guy, Laban. Okay, so verse 6, Esau noticed that Isaac blessed Jacob and sent him to Padan Aram to get a wife there. When he blessed him, Isaac commanded Jacob not to marry a Canaanite woman. And Jacob listened to his father and mother and went to Padan Aram. Esau realized that his father Isaac disapproved of the Canaanite women, so Esau went to Ishmael and married, in addition to his other wives, Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. She was a sister of Nebaioth. I don't know. That's really, I'm getting the feeling that Esau is pretty thick. He's just now realizing that his wives are a pain in the butt to his family. Now, it could be he's blinded by love or lust, and he doesn't realize this until this point. But I think he's just trying to play catch up now, trying to please his dad, but once again, he's taking on a third wife. That's just going to be terrible for the family dynamic. So you've already seen how polygamy has really screwed up some families, including the Hagar incident with Sarah. So this is once again describing what these characters do. It's not the Bible prescribing it. It's not saying this is what you should do. And honestly, we're going to eventually get to the book of Ezra, and it has, at the end of it, probably the most difficult passage for me out of the entire Bible. A lot of people have problems with the Israelites, killing people in the Promised Land, or Jesus coming back and just slaughtering wholesale people, enemies that, refuse to repent. But I don't really have issues with any of that. It's really, there's a chapter in Ezra where they're going back to Israel, the Hebrews are, to rebuild after being captive in the Babylonian captivity. And Ezra makes all the people divorce their pagan wives. And honestly, I'm going to be a little bold and step out and say I don't think he made the right decision on that. But what I wanted to say really is it's not the fact that these women are Canaanites that Abraham and Isaac don't want their kids marrying into. It's not racism. It's not that they might have a different ethnicity or lineage. Rather, you're going to find this in the Old Testament time and time again. It is because they are people who worship false deities and can lead others into sin because of that. So it's a wise thing, it's a wisdom thing that these people are trying to impress upon their children. Don't marry these people who live in the Promised Land, because they will lead you astray from worshiping the one true God. Now, as you can see, that's more of like a cultural, religious difference. It is quite different to be married to someone who is an unbeliever. It's not quite difficult. It's extremely difficult. I don't have experience with that. I'm very blessed in that regard. In the New Testament, Paul has lots of advice to people who are married to unbelievers or who worship other deities. But ultimately, it's better not to get into that position to begin with, if possible. It's better to be what the New Testament calls equally yoked. Now, a yoke is basically a board that would strap two oxen together. So they're stuck together. They're now an ox team or donkeys or whatever, horses. And so they can pull together in one direction. And there's a lot of math to it to where, two together can do like 5 times what a single one could do, when you would think it's just double. Paul argues in the New Testament that marriage is this same way. You don't want to be unequally yoked with someone who doesn't share what your deepest values are. Now, in the New Testament, Paul outright says, do not divorce. In that scenario, do not divorce. Stay married, because by your character, by your prayers, you don't know if you will be able to win your spouse to the Lord. And there's also the fact that you made a vow, right? You don't want to break that vow. So that's an aside. We're going to hit that topic a few more times in the Bible, but I wanted to point out that it's not that Isaac is racist against Canaanites. It has to do with their religious beliefs specifically, which will lead his children astray. Now, they also sound like that they're just like problem people, personality-wise also, but that's not a reason, that's not a good reason to divorce either, or whatever, or not marry someone, I guess. So, okay. So Esau goes and marries this lady. Verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He reached a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He took one of the stones from the place, put it there at his head, and lay down in that place. So, no pillow. He's fleeing to Haran and sleeping on a rock. That's kind of a desolate place to be. Verse 12, though, we're going to get something good. And he dreamed. A stairway was set on the ground with its top reaching heaven, and God's angels were going up and down on it. The Lord was standing there beside him, saying, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your offspring the land that you are now sleeping on. Your offspring will be like dusts of the earth, and you will spread out toward the west, the east, the north, and the south. All the people on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. Look, I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So that's an amazing dream. I'm going to touch on the first part of it, that stairway, in a little bit. There's actually a song called Stairway to Heaven. The Simpsons do a spinoff and make it an escalator. I think it's pretty funny. But the second part is basically reiterating the covenant that God has made with Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob. And it's, 3 parts really. But he's blessing him, gonna give him this land. That's part 1, the promised land to his offspring. 2, he's gonna bless him with a multitude of offspring. So a lot of people. And then 3, all people are going to be blessed through that offspring. So the first one we know is going to be Israel. We're going to be where the Hebrews, the descendants, end up taking in the promised land, which happens to be where Jacob is sleeping. 2 is going to be the Hebrew people, the Israelites, going to be direct descendants of Jacob. And 3, how are everyone in the world, all people, is going to be blessed through the offspring. That's because Jesus Christ comes through Jacob's lineage, blessing all people, including my ancestors, who were Germanic pagans, who most likely fought the Roman Empire and fought them off. So I'm proud of them for that. But I am very happy that someone decided to share Jesus with my ancestors a long time ago. Fun fact about Germans: we didn't have a Christmas tree until the Germans came to America and brought that tradition with them. Cool thing about Christianity. Christianity works in all culture, across all political spectrums. Now, it inevitably leads to more freedom, which is why all of our founding fathers went to church. Every last one of our founding fathers went to church. They weren't all Bible-believing Christians. Some were deists. But because from their faith, they decided, hey, freedom is the way to go. But whether you're in America or you're in a communist like Romania after World War II, the gospel will still be spread and can proliferate. Now, the cool thing is, when it comes to new people and new cultures, it doesn't demand iconoclasm. Iconoclasm meaning let's destroy the old. So like Islam, you remember ISIS whenever they were taking over parts of Syria? Well, they went in and committed iconoclasm on all of the pagan temples. They took down statues. They just destroyed great ancient artwork because it offended them and what they believed God wanted. Christianity does not demand that. Christianity instead says, keep your feasts, keep your parties, keep your holidays, but now understand that these good things, these fun, great things, you're doing them in worship of the one true God. So eat and drink and be merry, but do it all to the glory of God. And that's why we have Easter, for example, which has several pagan roots. But when those pagans got converted, they said, well, we really love celebrating Easter. Let's take some of our fun activities and some of the things that we used to do, and let's still have a great feast, but let's celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ instead. So you can keep your culture. I think that's an amazing part of Christianity. And in the same regard, some of those Germans decided, let's bring that Christmas tree into our worship of God by having it, decorating it around Christmas time and celebrating the greatest gift the world has ever known, Jesus Christ. And we can have this really pretty tree and keep part of our culture. So that's a fun fact about the German people. I'll move on. Verse 15 says, look, I'm with you and will watch over you wherever you go. That's the best blessing of all. Absolutely the best blessing of all. He could have given Jacob anything in the wilderness here, sleeping on a rock, like a pillow, for example. But instead, God says, I'm going to watch over you and be with you wherever you go. And that's beautiful. And that's the best thing any of us could possibly ask for on during our time on earth. Verse 16. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do verse 15b. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now that echoes a verse in the New Testament. Hey, I got a computer here, so I'm going to look it up. Verse in the New Testament talks about, what does it say? He will finish the work he started. That's going to be Philippians 1:6. Philippians 1:6 says, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So that's a very similar verse to this promise that he's given Jacob. It says, I will not leave you until I've done what I have promised you. So God's going to complete what he has promised Jacob. which is great. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that stairwell to heaven. And so Jacob sees that there is access to heaven. Now keep in mind, like, even King David in the Psalms, he talks about Sheol all the time. Now Sheol, and we're going to talk about this later and more in depth, but Sheol back then is basically like a holding place for the dead. It's not heaven, not necessarily hell, but it's just death. And David talks about, can I worship you in Sheol, talking to God. Well, this is where Jacob's getting a front row seat to this prophecy that you will be able to access heaven one day. We're seeing these angels ascending and descending, and that means that heaven's open. Like, it's possible to get there. We have all this sin in our lives, and we don't really have a solution for it yet. But God's giving Jacob this vision of a future where there is a solution. There's a stairway to heaven to be reconciled to God. Now, the exciting thing is, Jesus sort of references this in the New Testament. Not sort of. I think it's pretty explicit. But in John 1, when Jesus is calling Philip and Nathanael to come follow him, if you go to verse 49, it says, "Rabbi," Nathanael replied, "you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Now, Jesus then says in verse 50, "Do you believe only because I told you I saw you under the fig tree?" So Jesus had this word discernment, talking about how he saw Philip under this fig tree earlier, or Nathanael. And then Jesus goes on to say, "You will see greater things than this." Verse 51 says, "Then he said," talking about Jesus, said, "I assure you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Okay, the Son of Man, Jesus is referring to himself whenever he uses that phrase. He's calling himself the Son of Man. He is actually referencing a verse in Daniel. When we get to Daniel, we'll talk about that. But it is, Daniel sees this vision of basically the Son of Man coming on clouds of fire. Daniel sees a vision of Jesus basically returning at the end of the age. Well, what John sort of sees in Revelation. Jesus adopts this title, Son of Man, from the book of Daniel, which is Daniel's Old Testament. For those who don't know, the book of Daniel is a minor prophet in the Old Testament. We're going to read through his book later. Jesus is in the New Testament, so there's a many hundred years separation here. Jesus is adopting that title, though, as himself, calling him the Son of Man. And so look what he says to Nathanael. "You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on" what? "On the Son of Man." Now, what did Jacob see? The angels of heaven ascending and descending, going up and down on this stairway. Jesus is saying, I am that stairway. I'm the stairway. And so so the stairwell is a type for Jesus. And Jesus makes it explicit in the New Testament. You remember when Jacob saw there was access to heaven? Well, Nathanael, it's here. I'm that access to heaven. It's not that Jesus shows us the way to heaven. Jesus explicitly says, I am the way. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, when we get to the New Testament, this is a blasphemous statement to the Jews living at the time that don't understand. They haven't put these dots together. And so I don't want to get too far off. We'll talk about that later. We're in the Old Testament now. I get super excited about stuff having to do with Jesus. So I'm going to keep going. So when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He was afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Now, what Jacob doesn't understand yet is that God's everywhere. And he might have an understanding about that, but he might think that this place in particular is super special. Of course, it is a future promised land. But when he says the Lord's in this place and I did not know, well, the Lord is with him, right? So wherever Jacob goes, the Lord's going to be there. The God of the universe is everywhere. It can be everywhere, right? So it's an interesting statement that he's putting a lot of emphasis on this spot And Jesus in the future is going to talk to the woman at the well about this, talking about how in the future you're going to worship God everywhere, not just on this mountain where your ancestors did. So more to talk about that, especially when we talk about the temple and God's presence being in the Old Testament temple. Verse 18, early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that was near his head and set it up as a marker. He poured oil on top of it and named the place Bethel, or Bethel, which means house of God. Though previously the city was named Luz, L-U-Z. Bethel's definitely a better name. Then Jacob made a vow. If God will be with me and watch over me on this journey, if he provides me with food to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. This stone that I have set up as a marker will be God's house, and I will give you a tenth of all that you give me. Okay, two things. One, what Jacob says here is very inward focused. It's not really focused on God. It's talking about if God provides the food, if God gives me safety, then I will make him my God. No, Jacob, we worship God because of who he is. He's deserving of it. Whether or not, we're burned at the stake for our faith, whether or not we're provided. Now, I do believe God will provide for his children, but there are, special times. Okay, so I got interrupted there. My beautiful family came home, and my sweet daughter just ran through the door to me and gave me a hug, and she usually doesn't do that. So I played with her, and it was really awesome. And then she had to go take a bath, and then she was all sad because dad is down here. So I think what I was talking about, though, was that there are certain circumstances where, you will suffer for Christ. And he tells us that. He basically says, in this life you'll have hardships, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Let me see what that is. Take heart, I've overcome the world. So that's John 16:33. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So our hope is not necessarily in this life, guys. It is in the next life. And that's what we're investing in currently on earth right now. And so whether or not we are prosperous or we have issues, we have an eternal treasure stored up for us. So, okay. I honestly don't know how I was applying that because it's been so long since I paused. Let's see. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that was near his head and set it up as a marker. He poured oil on it, named it Bethel. We talked about that. Oh, so he's making this vow. Okay. Boom. He's making this vow, and he's saying, so long as God provides these things, then he's going to be my God. And I was making the argument that, well, no, whether or not your life is with lots of trouble or with lots of ease, he is still your God, and he has a purpose for you, and you are charged with being a good steward of the time, treasure, and talent that God has given you. So, verse 22, it says, this stone that I have set up as a marker will be God's house, and I will give to you a tenth of all that you give me. I don't understand. I don't know why he specifically came up with the tenth here. Maybe he heard about Melchizedek and how his grandfather, Abraham, gave a tenth of everything to Melchizedek. Remember the priest from Salem? So, but in any case, Jacob's making this vow that he's going to give this tenth to God and God's house. And so eventually what I'm assuming is we're going to get into more of like a temple scenario where you have priests to the Lord. So that's the end of chapter 28. We're going to look at Jacob getting married here in the next chapter, I do believe. And then we're going to talk about his sons. And eventually, let's see, flipping ahead here, let's see what the next pretty big event is. So Jacob's going to be blessed. Oh, we have that scene where Jacob wrestles with an angel. That's going to be fun to talk about. And then he's going to meet back up with Esau. And yeah, I guess we're going to stick on Jacob for a while, huh? But eventually we're going to, get to one of his sons, and we're going to get to Egypt, and then we get to go to Exodus. So I'm really stoked about that, talking about how God is not only the God of salvation, but redemption. And he will bring you out of slavery. Now, in the New Testament, usually it's referring to a spiritual sickness, a spiritual slavery, a slavery to sin, to your desires to do evil, bring you out of that and free you. Well, we're going to get a physical representation of that in Exodus, which I am stoked to talk about. So until then, this is James from The World's Last.